When I heard the news that Tom had been killed, that dreadful day, I thought, well, he was a soldier. Reg, you've got to come to terms with this. But it's not until afterwards you discover the deceit, the lies, the propaganda. We didn't need to go to war with Iraq. It was a war of option, not necessity. It has to be the last and final option, the last desperate option when all other avenues have failed. But with Iraq, it was almost the first option. Well, I used to think that Tom was a little bit introvert. Didn't speak a lot, very quiet, sat in his room a lot, kept himself to himself a little bit, and we always thought he was a bit shy. And I didn't think the army would probably suit him. But you've heard the saying, I'll give you the boy, give me back the man. Within 6 months of being at that college, we saw a change. He had the makings of him.
Just being told that what's happened here is that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
Everybody was glued to the TVs. And I remember, oh, wow, this is like an action film, this can't be really in real life. And little did I know that was the beginning of Tom's demise, because at the time Tom was a serving Royal Military policeman, and that was the catalyst for the Iraq War, was 9/11, because President Bush then decided somebody got out their ass kicked over 9/11, and his focus was on this axis of evil.
This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world by seeking weapons of mass destruction.
The threat from Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, potentially nuclear weapons capability, that threat is real.
I asked Tom, I said, well, this Iraq War, Tom, are you going to be involved with all this? He said, Dad, we've got to go out there and get rid of this madman that's going to unleash these weapons. And I believed it. And Tom went to war with that lie ringing in his ears, because they never existed. The day Tom died, he was sent to a police station in Iraq, where 2 days earlier, the parachute regiment, 21 members of the parachute regiment, his former company, had to call out the quick response force to rescue him from a mob of about 400 that were baying for their blood. And then 2 days later, my son, with 5 colleagues, was sent into that very same hellhole with no equipment, well, very basic equipment, no working radio, no satellite phone, no flares, no morphine, no grenades, just 50 rounds of ammunition. Next thing they know, RPGs coming over the wall, machine gun fire, and they literally fought for their lives. That every one of those 6 lads, up to this I was accepting it, but I can't accept he died for a lie, for a falsehood, and in such a horrific way. Those 6 lads must have been terrified. But I knew I wasn't going to win then on the night, or going through the counts, looking at the figures coming in, and I didn't expect to.
And I know too that Iraq has been a divisive issue in this country. But I hope now that we can unite again and look to the future.
I hope in my heart that one day the Prime Minister may be able to say sorry. That one day he will say sorry to the families of the bereaved, and one day the Prime Minister might be able to visit wounded soldiers in hospital.
And I just wished I could see his face behind me. But afterwards, when I looked at the camera footage, I could see he was a very uncomfortable man. The war and losing Tom has literally devastated my life, because my wife at the time, my late wife Sally, couldn't come to terms with his death, the violent manner in which he died. So it's had a devastating effect on the whole family. And that's what happens in war. But, you know, the fact he's been dead nearly as long as he's been alive is quite sobering. Lovely young man. Lovely young man. Proud of him.
I think in hindsight, and we're all much cleverer in hindsight than we are at the time, in hindsight, the decision to go to war was wrong, just as I defended it at the time for honest reasons, namely that I genuinely believed Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I think you've got to be straight about it, that it was wrong and it unleashed calamitous waves of conflict. Post 9/11 was a very dramatic moment, and Tony Blair certainly made the case, and I think it was quite a persuasive case, that things had changed fundamentally and that you needed to then look at the whole of geopolitics in a different way. But George Bush's particular sort of conflation of both the Al-Qaeda attack on the American Twin Towers on the one hand and the Iraqi dictator on the other was something I never bought. I never accepted that.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
For me, the case for war in the cabinet and the decision that I took in the end to back Tony Blair's recommendation as a cabinet minister, and I take full responsibility for that, was because I feared reality and the intelligence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that he'd used before on his neighbors and on his own people. So when the whole argument started to be made and we were shown the intelligence as cabinet ministers, I believed the intelligence because it was that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and I knew he'd used them. And tragically, that intelligence was shown to be completely false. And so we went to war on a lie.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe. There were no lies. Parliament and Cabinet were not misled. There was no secret commitment to war. Intelligence was not falsified, and the decision was made in good faith.
I think Tony Blair made the decision he did on an honest basis. Now people call him a liar, people call him all sorts of things, and there's no doubt that Iraq decision was fateful for his political legacy. For me, the legacy is be very, very careful about any attempt to invade other countries. The reverberating consequences of that war are momentous, and one of the other reasons why I will always regret being part of the decision that we took, and be very honest about why I backed the decision, but I think you should be equally honest about the calamitous consequences of it.
A lot of racism. Doesn't take a genius to know that my name is Hussein and Saddam Hussein was the big bad at that point. And, you know, trying to reconcile that Welsh identity with the Iraqi identity, for me, like, it was, I can't deny that I hated Wales.
Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
Growing up as like a Welsh Iraqi boy, it was odd because obviously Wales were and are part of the UK, and you know were part of the war and invasion of Iraq, and it was something I found quite difficult to reconcile, that Iraq-Wales sort of identity, and for me it was something that it came to be quite difficult to sort of really identify with my Welsh side because of the destruction that was happening to my family in Iraq. I think what's amazing is that the way kids can be politicized at such a young age to being racist. I remember one kid saying, I hope all your family in Iraq die. I was called terrorist. Comments about my skin color, my name. It was difficult, and it made me feel even less connected to the country that I was living in. How I managed to was really just growing up and finding out more about my mother's side of the family. And obviously I love my mother's side of the family, but in general, Wales and that identity, the way I connected with that was finding out about my grandfather and that he was a miner and he had like Trotsky written on our shed when my mother was young, and finding about the radicalism of my family and the internationalism of the miners' struggle, and like Paul Robeson coming to Wales and seeing that that there's common struggle amongst people being oppressed, and that is how and that is sort of the Welsh identity I've internalized. First thing is I remember just anger from my father, despair that it was happening, and the way sort of parliamentary politics works, it can kind of make you feel extremely hopeless and extremely powerless, and you could get the sense that he's watching this on TV, but what can he do? There's nothing he can do about it, and I think that is a real traumatic sort of experience for someone to have, and for me that age to see it happening, and it was surreal, and obviously for the people there, just absolute destruction and terror. I think that's one of the things that is such a big loss for me personally, is that not being able to return to Iraq until last year, seeing my grandmother saying to me she didn't think she'd see me again before she died. That level of just the way the war just completely ripped a lot of the diaspora away from their roots. It's not that Iraq was this perfect place. Yeah, it was quite advanced. You got nice areas, but there was a lot of people living in. There was a lot of people living under extreme pressure. There was a lot of people living in extreme poverty. There was a lot of people living. They couldn't say anything politically if it was against the government. That's not freedom. But equally, that freedom was allowed. That level of oppression, was allowed and in fact pushed by the West. And I think that's a misconception. And then when Saddam did something that the West didn't like, they get rid of him. And I think that is complex, but that's a misconception. I mean, look at Iraq now. I mean, it's a failed state, and that's that's an incredibly sad time really, and it's a sad moment for Iraqi history. It's just not comparable really to anything that you can really describe. It's a complete destruction of every part of Iraqi society really.
I'd definitely be different to what I was in 2003 with my thoughts towards it, to what I am now. So I would have a different approach to it than I did back then, and I would question it a lot more. Mostly because of what we've learned out afterwards, that it wasn't all truth that we've been told. I was in my early 20s. I was a reserve soldier, so I was involved in the military in some fashion, and I had applied to join the Royal Marines in 2002 and was given my start date for 24th of March 2003.
People look back on this time and look back on this conflict. I honestly believe they will see this as one of the defining moments of our century.
It wasn't a surprise that this was happening, because we had 9/11, so we were actively deploying around the globe into things, so it wasn't a huge shock that something else was happening on the back of Afghanistan. But it was difficult because I was caught up in the emotion, as I was already had my foot in the military. So the young, excitable, thinking about this next adventure, huge adventure I was going to go on in the Royal Marines, but also then looking at the other side of it, as in, okay, we are going to, it looks like we're going to go to war in Iraq. So what was going to happen when I eventually got a part of it.
Because of you, the tyrant has fallen and Iraq is free.
So now we were in the transition phase for the country where, yes, Saddam had gone, but how's the country now going to operate post-Saddam, which it didn't seem as if they had much forethought in that, because when I got there in 2006, the current play on the ground was we no longer had a central government with Saddam, a dictator, ruling it. We had two religious factions, which are the Sunni and the Shia, which were now fighting each other for power. It's difficult. It's a very difficult one. It's not black and white for me. There's no, you can never sit there and say to someone, no, it was completely wrong or it was completely right. There's a lot of things wrong about it. And for a lot of people involved in it, a lot of things right came out of it. From our own point of view, my point of view, it was, yes, successful. And we did a lot of things and changed a lot of things within what we were asked to do. But on the grand scheme, we didn't change a lot. It was still, we left and it was still going on. The bad guys were still out there and we were still sending guys out there to go and chase the bad guys.
You could be the best soldier in the world. You could be like super soldier and being able to do that. It could just take that one moment. It could just take that one moment. You know? That's what they always used to say. They always used to say, start of a tour and end of a tour are the worst times. Start of the tour is because you knew, you don't know the area, you don't know everything and all the rest of it. The end of the tour is because you're like, oh my God, I just want to get out of here. I joined in the April 1999 it was, so I went through my training and then I ended up coming to my battalion in the Millennium. And you start to, you know, you start to integrate in, you start to integrate into battalion life. You do get to that point then when you sit there and think, geez, I've made it. When you look at that, you think, end of the day, this is my job. I'm a soldier. Wherever I'm told to go, I go and do it, and I go and do it to the best of my ability. What happened, and why it happened was there had to be a response. America wanted to go for it, America went for it, and as allies, we joined as well. Kids used to come up and, you know, they mill around and they do, you know, and things like that. You want to be that approachable soldier. You want to be able to, you know, but at the same time you want to be thinking to yourself, am I leaving myself exposed? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I doing the other? And things like that. I remember a friend of mine had a breeze block to the face, I think it was, you know, and when you're in that wagon and you hear someone say, oh, so-and-so's injured, and you're thinking, oh, what's going on? Like, you know, you're the driver, the commander knows what's going on because you're the driver, and all you're hearing is that, and you're thinking, oh my God, is he all right? And then you go back, and as you're driving back down there, you can see like all the Land Rovers lined up, and you can see all the people lobbing bricks, and you're thinking to yourself, Jesus Christ, that escalated so quickly. Remember one night, now I thought I had a dream. I thought it was just me dreaming. I dreamt that I was alone on a patrol, and I was calling out, don't leave me, I'm all alone, and all the rest of this. It turns out that I had actually woken up and I was shouting, you know, don't leave me and things like that, and it was really really scary. And when you come home, you just feel a bit, you know, when you're sat in the house, you feel a bit alien. You're like, well, I'm so used to doing what I was doing. Why am I sitting in, you know, a nice clean house and, you know, and nice comfy bed and things like that? It's a bit weird, it is. And I think it's even worse for people soldiers who have been through traumatic experiences, even worse for them. Because, you know, they're just reliving that, and it's hard to break out of. And Iraq, well, Iraq's neither got any better or any worse, really, is it? And you sit there and you look at it and you think, so what are they doing actually? What are they? Are they rebuilding? Are they doing this or that? They're doing the other and things like that. Is it back to the way it was? And it is. It's kind of, you look at it and you think, gee, well, so what was the point of me, you know, spending 6 months of my time out there doing what I was doing? It's like when you got your kid growing up. You're going to nurture it, you're going to direct it, you're going to be able to turn around and say, oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this. There's going to come a point where you're going to turn around and go, you're on your own now. You make your own decisions and things like that. And I think it was a bit like that with Iraq. There's only so much we can do, there's only so much we can, before you're going to have to actually turn around and say, well, there we go, that's it.